It began as a cold, rain-swept island on the fringes of Europe. A kingdom of mist and iron, seemingly destined for obscurity. At its zenith, the British Empire was a true colossus, a global hegemon that covered a quarter of the entire Earth, and India was its jewel in the crown, a land where the British state held the fate of over 400 million souls. But this dominance was forged in iron and oak. The Royal Navy became the police of the seas, ensuring no one could challenge the lion on the water. In the late 16th century, England was a minor player on the world stage. While Spain and Portugal grew rich on gold from the New World, England was a small island nation with big ambitions and a very small treasury. But Queen Elizabeth I had a plan. She knew that if England couldn't outspend its rivals, it would have to outsmart them. She looked to the horizon, ready to unleash a new breed of sailors upon the world. She unleashed a new breed of sailors, privateers like Francis Drake, who plundered Spanish gold to fund the crown. But plunder was a short-term game. In 1600, a royal charter was signed, and the East India Company was born. What began as a venture of merchants would grow to command an army larger than Britain itself. The focus now shifted west. Across the Atlantic, a new chapter of the empire was being written. In 1607, English ships arrived on the shores of Virginia, founding Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in the Americas. The New World didn't greet them with gold. It met them with impenetrable forests, starvation, and brutal winters. Here, in the mud of Virginia and Massachusetts, the first empire was born. It wasn't an empire of grand palaces. It was an empire of sweat, blisters, and backbreaking labor. Every stake driven into the earth was a defiance of the wilderness. This was the foundation of the world we know today. They stepped into a silence that had reigned for millennia. But where others saw only shadows and ancient wood, they saw a future. With every tree felled and every path cleared, the silence of the wilderness was replaced by the rhythm of the axe and the hammer. By 1815, the world had a new master. After the crushing defeat of Napoleon, Britain stood alone as the world's undisputed superpower. The Royal Navy became the iron fist of the empire. With over 600 ships, it didn't just protect trade, it dictated it. This was the era of Pax Britannica, the British peace, a peace enforced by the roar of cannons and the tactical brilliance of Admiral Nelson. From the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, the sea lanes were the arteries of a global heart. For a century, no rival dared to challenge the Union Jack. But the winds of change were blowing. Sails were soon to give way to steam, and wood to iron. The empire was about to enter its greatest and most industrial age. The dawn of the Victorian era had begun, an age of coal, fire, and unstoppable steel. By the mid-19th century, Britain reached its absolute peak. It was no longer just a kingdom. It was an industrial titan, a global financier, and the master of technology. This was the Victorian zenith, an empire on which the sun never set. It was the workshop of the world. From the soot-stained skies of Manchester to the roaring foundries of Birmingham, British coal and iron forged a new reality. This reality was managed not from the factory floor, but from the secluded, opulent chambers of London's elite. Within these gilded walls, fueled by industrial profits, powerful men architected the future, shaping the globe with every handshake and financial decree. But handshakes alone did not move the world. It was the newly laid nerves of the empire, the undersea telegraph cables that carried these decrees across oceans in seconds, not months. For the first time in history, time and space were conquered. London became the beating heart of a global machine, connected by copper and steam. Protecting this global machine, was the world's most formidable force, the Royal Navy. These ironclad leviathans were the ultimate argument of the British Crown, ensuring that the Pax Britannica remained unchallenged across the seven seas. Yet, beneath the glittering surface, the shadows were deepening. The wealth of the few was built on the toil of the many, and in the sprawling slums of East London, the dream of empire looked very different. As the 20th century dawned, the golden age began to dim. The shadows of new rivals and internal strife grew long, and the sun that once never set on the British Empire began its slow, inevitable descent. In January 1901, the heart of the Victorian world stopped beating. As the Queen's funeral procession moved through the silent grey streets of London, an uneasy feeling took hold. The long summer of the Empire was ending, and the cold winds of a new, uncertain century were beginning to blow. Across the North Sea and the Atlantic, new titans were rising. German steel and American innovation began to eclipse the old workshop of the world, igniting a frantic multi-billion-pound arms race that would soon set the continent ablaze. But the cracks weren't just overseas. At home, the old social order was under siege. Voices long silenced began to roar. From the picket lines of the factories to the suffragettes demanding the right to be heard. The Victorian peace was shattering from within. In the summer of 1914, the flickering lamps of Europe went out. A generation of young men, raised on the myths of imperial glory, marched away to a war they thought would be over by Christmas. They left behind a world that would never be the same again. The Great War was a meat grinder that consumed the empire's wealth and its youth. In the sucking mud of the Somme and the scorching dust of Gallipoli, the old certainties of the Victorian age were buried forever. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, the victory felt like a funeral. The empire had won the war, but it had lost its heart. Across every town and village, the empty chairs told a story of a generation that would never return, and a debt, both human and financial, that could never be fully repaid. The victory in Europe had come at a cost the empire could no longer sustain. Across the globe, the tide was turning. In India, a fragile man in white robes led a march that would shake the very foundations of British rule, proving that moral force was more powerful than any ironclad fleet. Then came a second, even darker storm. Britain stood defiant, but the effort broke her. By 1945, the workshop of the world lay in ruins. After a second, even more devastating world war, the sun finally began its long-delayed descent. From the palaces of New Delhi to the savannas of Africa, the Union Jack was lowered for the last time. A new world was being born, and the British Empire, once the greatest on earth, was fading into the pages of history. The empire is gone, but its ghost remains in the very fabric of our world. It lives on in the laws that govern distant shores, the language that connects the continents, and the architecture of 1,000 cities. It is no longer an empire of land and steel, but an empire of influence, a silent foundation upon which the modern world was built. The sun has set on the old order, but its light still reflects in the dawn of a new age.